Can you spot red flags? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I want to talk a little bit about red flags in a relationship and how to spot them and why you might have a hard time spotting red flags in a relationship. I had this kind of like revelation that came through while I was scrolling social media one day, and I just kind of really wanted to share this with you because it was kind of like an epiphany moment for me. It's something that's actually kind of obvious, but it felt like a really big like aha moment for me, and so I really want to share it with you in case this is something that resonates for you. I'm a firm believer that many of us are unable to spot red flags in a relationship because many of us are just simply not taught what's a red flag and what's not, and many of us are just required to figure it out on our own. And I think this is especially true for women. I'm not saying that it's not true for men, but I think especially for women, we are not really taught how to spot red flags in a relationship because many of us don't have guidance, role models, people that we can turn to like help us learn red flags. A lot of us are having to learn about what is a red flag and what isn't on our own with just life experience. We got to learn the hard way. That said, some of us seem to have to keep learning the same lessons over and over and over again. We realize something is a red flag, and then we turn into a bull and just run right towards the red flag. Or the flags are flying and we think it's a circus. We're like, hey, this is fun, right? All the cliches. I'd heard this saying a lot, and I'm gonna probably butcher this saying, but it's something like, if your home was chaos, you will always see chaos as home, which essentially means that if your home life was chaotic, traumatic in some way or something, you will tend to see that behavior, no matter how unhealthy it is, you will tend to see that as home because that's familiar to you. And I've heard people say that a lot, but I kind of had this wake up call. There was kind of a trend that was going on, I think like on TikTok and stuff, of like pointing out, it was like red flags, it was beige flags, which I think are like neutral flags, and then there was green flags, which means like those are good things, right? And people were like, oh, my boyfriend's beige flag is this, or my boyfriend's green flag is this, or my ex-boyfriend's red flag was this, or something like that, or whatever. There was like a big trend that was going on. And I saw this video, just showed up on my For You page, I don't know who this person is, that was saying that her boyfriend's red flag was, and then proceeded to explain a situation that was this horribly violent outburst that this man had where he had basically seriously abused her and hurt her. It was a very disturbing story. And I noticed that there were so many women that were commenting on this video that were like, that wasn't the red flag. The red flag was what led up to that happening, that was warning you that this man was that violent. Which is true, because in reality, like most of these things, like these situations and relationships that get horrible, that get really bad, there were warning signs. But many of us don't see them or ignore them. And my first initial thought, and I will admit this is very judgmental, was like, how do you not see the warning signs to something getting that bad? But I realized that in my own personal experience, and this is just me, I don't have a history of physical violence in my past from childhood or anything. Like, I don't have a history of physical violence. So physical violence was not something that showed up as a pattern for me in relationships when I started dating. That said, many years ago, I did have a boyfriend that I was seeing, and it came really close. Like, it came really close to getting physically abusive. He stopped himself, but he came really close to actually hitting me. Now, luckily, that relationship was actually sort of ending. Looking back in hindsight, if I had stayed in that relationship, would it have gotten physically violent? Probably. Would I have left if it did get physically violent? I don't know. I'd like to think that I would. That moment sticks out in my head, and it really sticks out in my head because it was so different than anything else I had experienced. It stood out to me as this moment of like, whoa, like this is not something I'm used to. Like it was like danger, this is not familiar territory for me. It was easy for me to spot that as being like an oh my god moment because it wasn't something that I was used to. Now, on the flip side, I do have a very serious history in my past from childhood of psychological abuse. manipulation, gaslighting, things like that. So those things have absolutely shown up in relationships as an adult. I've gotten pretty deep into relationships of being manipulated, gaslit, psychologically abused, where I didn't even know it was happening because I was so used to that being my reality. I was so used to having a childhood where I would see something and then I was told that what I was seeing wasn't real. Like what this person was telling me was actually reality. So when I got into future relationships and I would be dating a guy and like I would be like, okay, this is happening, and he would just be like, no, it's not. And he would deny my reality. Having my reality denied was normal for me. Like it was like, okay, well, I guess I guess that's just normal, because that's what I was used to. I didn't see the warning signs or the red flags in a psychologically abusive relationship as an adult, because in childhood that was the norm. Like that was home for me. Like that was what I was familiar with. And that's just my situation. But however, somebody who may have grown up in a violent household where physical abuse was the norm, I'm not saying if that person wants that, but it's much more common for that person to get into those relationships as they get older, because that's home to them. Like that's familiar to them. Even if they don't want to be in that relationship, even if that's not what they want, even if that's not their goal, it will feel like home to them because they are used to that, and they are much less likely to be able to spot the warning signs of that getting bad because it's normal for them. Violence is normal for them. So they don't see the behavior getting bad until it gets to really bad. In the same way for me, things like gaslighting, I didn't see them until they got so bad, because that was my norm. Like that was what I was used to. That felt like home to me. That felt familiar to me. There are obviously like red flags in people that, you know, maybe we've just never experienced them before, so we don't know that they're red flags, and they're just lessons that we have to learn on our own. However, if you find yourself consistently ignoring red flags over and over and over again in relationships because it's a pattern, it can be really helpful to look back on, okay, do I have a history of this pattern in my past somehow? And how can I be more aware of this happening sooner so it doesn't get to that point? If it's been happening to us since childhood, even if we're like actively like, no, I don't want to be in a relationship like this as an adult, we are still conditioned to see that behavior as normal until it gets to a certain level where we just can't ignore it anymore. And it will make it more difficult for us to spot the red flags in people. I'm a big believer that awareness is the key. So the more we can be aware of this, the more we can actually look at ourselves and be like, what are our patterns? What is the common denominator in these relationships? I remember actually a conversation with someone who's actually a PhD psychologist. She was talking about how in her dating life, she dated one narcissist. One of her exes was someone that she would have clinically diagnosed as a narcissist. But because she didn't have a history of dealing with people who were narcissistic in her past, like people who actually have narcissistic personality disorder. She didn't have a history of that. Most of the guys she dated had not fit into that category, and she did date someone who did fit into that category. And it stood out to her as like, this is weird. She didn't know right away that that was what was going on, because usually with narcissists, they're very good at presenting themselves as not being a narcissist, and then you end up figuring out later. However, she remembers looking back on it that this guy stood out because it was so different than what she was used to, which took me by surprise, because narcissistic traits were something that I always grew up around. So I always saw narcissistic traits as being normal. So if I did meet somebody who wasn't exhibiting narcissistic traits, that stood out to me. The narcissistic traits were normal to me. So the non-narcissist would be what stood out to me as being unusual. So if you are finding yourself consistently ending up in relationships that are going the exact same way, and you kind of end up waking up at one point and being like, oh my God, things are so bad, but I don't know how I got here, that's usually that there's an old pattern, and you want to look for that old pattern. And to be honest with you, it took me a long time to understand the connection between what I dealt with in childhood and then what I dealt with now. Like, be patient with yourself, because like this is deep work that a lot of people are not even going to be willing to do. So if you are noticing that this pattern, first of all, forgive yourself, because at the end of the day, your body wants to keep you safe, but your body can sometimes confuse familiarity with safety. And it's really important to be aware of when you are just falling into a familiar pattern and when you are actually in a safe environment. And it might take you some time and you might make some mistakes, but at the end of the day, it's really about learning, and it's about awareness, being aware of the pattern. There was actually an exercise that I heard of a long time ago. This came from a random book that I don't even remember the name of. Overall, it wasn't a good book, but this particular exercise was actually really helpful. You write 3 letters to the 3 most significant romantic relationships in your past, and like handwrite them, journal them, so you're not, because I feel like if you're typing them on your phone, it's like really easy for you to just like copy and paste and send. This is just a journaling exercise. You're not actually going to send them this, so like hand write it in like a journal so you're not tempted to actually send it to them, because this isn't about them, this is about you. In the letter, confess to them what you did wrong in the relationship. Now, this can bring up a lot of stuff for a lot of people, but what's important is to understand that this is not dismissing that the other person probably played a role in the demise of the relationship or in whatever happened in the relationship. You're not taking away any of their role in the relationship. You're just examining it from what did you do in the relationship to cause the relationship to go the way that it went, or, you know, whatever the scenario was. For me, this was a very eye-opening exercise, because by the 3rd letter, I realized I had just written the same letter 3 times. Because what it does is it shows you what your pattern is. What was the pattern that you were showing up in all of these relationships? That does not mean that the entire relationship and the entire demise of the relationship is your fault. And I don't want, because there are some people that I think are going to try to sink into this like guilt or shame or judgment. I don't want people to start doing that, because that's not a healthy place to be in either. This is simply about observing your own pattern, your own behavior of like, okay, what was I showing up in this relationship? And how did this affect the relationship? And now your situation may not necessarily be as cut and dry as mine. I mean, mine was like literally like the revelation of like, oh my God, I just wrote the same letter 3 times. Yours may not be quite as obvious a pattern, but my guess is it's probably going to be a pattern. Like, you're probably going to see some similarities, because for most people, that's usually the way it goes. Now, I'm also not saying that after doing this exercise that I all of a sudden was like, oh my God, I'm enlightened now and everything has changed and I did everything differently afterwards. Because, you know, what I was dealing with were very, very deep patterns that went way back. And I also, at that point in time when I did that, I did not have the tools or the knowledge or the support system to actually know how to heal that stuff. But it did wake me up and gave me an awareness of what I was doing. And it really was a catalyst for me to try to do more self-exploration and to try to gain more knowledge and more understanding. And honestly, after I did that exercise, I stayed single for quite a while, simply because I just was like, I'm not going to repeat this pattern again. For me, I think that was the right choice. It may not be the right choice for everybody, but I also want, and this is one of the reasons why I hesitate, because I do feel like there's this big push nowadays for like, particularly like men online having this obsession with women taking accountability, which I always find ironic, because men screaming that women need to take accountability is literally men saying that they're not going to take accountability. Because if you're screaming all the time that somebody else needs to take accountability, you're literally showing that you have the inability to take accountability yourself. So I'm not talking about you taking the full burden and responsibility for what it is that you contributed to the relationship, because I'm sure that most relationships are a two-way street, and it takes 2 people to make them work, and it takes 2 people for them to not work. But at the end of the day, being aware of your patterns with no guilt or shame, mind you, because bear in mind, most of these patterns are something that probably developed a long time ago, and these were probably patterns that were put onto you before you had the ability to actually have any say in these patterns. Most of these patterns probably go back to childhood. It's not your fault that you have these patterns. Once you're an adult, you have the responsibility to work on these patterns if you don't want to continue being in the cycle that you're in. But this is not about guilt or shame. This is about awareness of the patterns and understanding that if you want to have a healthy relationship, once you're aware of the pattern, you can now do whatever it is that you need to do in order to heal that pattern, in order to spot that pattern sooner in relationships, and also spot the warning signs of that pattern sooner in relationships. I think I've talked about this before, but you know, I had an instance a while back with this guy who I met, and I got really caught up in the, I don't want to say romance of it all, but I got kind of caught up in the moment of like how we connected and how we met, and I thought this was kind of like fate and all this kind of stuff. And then as I was getting to know him, I realized very quickly that he was an old pattern, and I got so mad at myself. I got so angry at myself because I was like, I thought I had beat this pattern, but I also realized that I spotted the pattern way sooner than I ever would have before. And I also was willing to walk away from the old pattern way sooner than I ever had before. So I realized that I had to forgive myself for repeating the pattern, but also understanding that part of the healing process was not saying that, okay, I'm never going to end up attracting a guy like this again, that this is never going to be a pattern that exists in my life again, because this is something that goes way back and you know, as far back as I can remember. But the fact that I'm aware of this pattern so much sooner, and the fact that I had enough self-worth and I had enough confidence in myself to say, okay, I'm not going to repeat this pattern anymore, and walk away. Even though it was difficult to walk away from, I was willing to do that so much sooner than I would have in the past. And that was part of the healing process. I think we often get really caught up, especially I think a lot of times in like the feminine energy space and stuff, where people get into this, once you connect to your feminine energy, you will never attract the wrong guy again. The, you know, bad guys or losers or narcissists or, you know, sociopaths or whatever this thing, they're never going to be attracted to you again, because you're going to be so high value, you're only going to draw in men that are fully aligned with you. And that's a nice thought. Like, I would love to think that that's true, but let's be real. The more vibrant and alive and connected you are to yourself, like, yeah, you will scare off some people who are just like not willing to deal with you, but there's always gonna be like bad people who are gonna be attracted to somebody who is an attractive person, somebody who a lot of people like and who a lot of people want to be around. And there's always gonna be people who are gonna be manipulative or, you know, just bad people that are going to kind of come to you in your life. The key is that when you actually get comfortable with yourself, you connect with yourself. My belief is for most women, it's going to be connecting to your feminine energy, your divine feminine energy, not like your surface superficial feminine energy, but like your true divine feminine energy. It's not that you'll never attract the wrong person again. It's not that your old patterns will never show up again. You will now be much more connected to your intuition. You'll be much more connected to your full self. And you'll have so much more awareness of yourself, what you want in your life, that when these people come into your life, they're not going to destroy your life. They're not going to be as appealing anymore. And you're going to be able to spot the signs, the red flags, the warning signs to, you know, them being bad people sooner and earlier. Sometimes maybe not as soon as you like, but definitely sooner than you did before. So these were just some things that they were kind of these revelations that I was having about spotting red flags and old relationship patterns and things like that I just wanted to share with you. Some of you, this might be obvious. Some of this stuff was things that I knew, but it was coming through from just a different perspective. Because, you know, I see a lot of things talking about, you know, women getting shut up rings, you know, men doing like horrible wedding vows, or men smashing women's faces into wedding cakes and stuff. And I see that happening a lot on social media and talking about this stuff. And I'm always like, this did not just happen. Like, even like Simone Biles and her husband and that whole thing about him saying he was the prize. She did not hear that for the first time when he said that. You know what I mean? Like, these things are, like, there's signs that this is happening. These things don't just happen out of the blue. There's warning signs that are telling you that this is going to happen. The problem is some of us willfully ignore them, because some of us have very tunnel vision, whether we're in love or whether we're just like, this is the person we want to be with, and we just have this very tunnel vision and we just don't see them because we're choosing not to see them. For some people, we're not seeing them because we're conditioned to think that their behavior is normal. Maybe the way that this guy is acting is the way that we've seen, you know, either our father or other men or something treat our mother, so that that becomes the norm, you know, or someone in our life, or someone we're emulating, or honestly, even the media and celebrities and the way that they act have a profound influence on us, even when we try to pretend that it doesn't. I sympathize with people who wake up in relationships and are all of a sudden realizing that, like, oh my God, I didn't see the warning signs, and like, how did I get here? Because I've been that person and I understand it. I would just encourage you to try to find those patterns and work on those patterns and do the healing work in order to be able to identify them, and also have patience with yourself and understand that, especially when you have deep patterns of conditioning and programming, of thinking that things are normal and healthy when they really aren't normal and healthy, is you're going to need to have patience with yourself and give yourself some time to readjust to what your normal is. And I think it's really important to have a vision for what you want in a relationship, and then asking yourself if certain behaviors support that. I can say a lot of things about my ex-husband, like a lot of negative things about my ex-husband. I knew for a fact that he was not going to smash my face in a cake, because I knew he just wasn't that person. And there was never a doubt in my mind, and he didn't, obviously, because that's not who he was as a person. But I also didn't grow up in a household where that would have been considered the norm, because my father would have never done that. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not something I was conditioned for. However, if you are someone who grew up in a household where that kind of behavior was the norm, you may not see the warning signs that somebody might be like that, because it's going to feel normal to you. So even if you're like, no, I don't want a man who would smash cake in my face, if you're not paying attention to the warning signs of who that man is, and he does, well, there may have been signs there, and there probably were signs there, but you either didn't know what signs to look for because you didn't have a model for that, or you just weren't taught what those warning signs are, or those warning signs may have felt normal to you because they probably matched with something that you experienced in your past. Awareness is always key. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful. I mean, I know I'm just scratching the surface of the concept of red flags, but I really do think that one of the biggest issues we have when it comes to relationships is that a lot of people are just going into dating and going to the dating world, and they have no idea how to spot red flags. I had a conversation with my mother, actually, where I was talking to her about my father, and like, I was kind of saying, like, how did you not notice his red flags? And she was like, oh, back in my day, we didn't have red flags. And I'm like, no, Mom, you did have red flags in your day. It's just, you didn't call them red flags and you didn't know how to spot them, right? I mean, most of the stuff I said in this video could apply to men as well, but I primarily speak to women. So speaking to women, women are not taught red flags. We're not taught what to look for. And unfortunately, oftentimes in childhood, we are conditioned to think that certain things that should be a red flag in relationships are actually acceptable. It's not just our childhood experiences. I'm not just putting it on the parents, but, you know, also the media and things like that. I mean, I could dive into a whole thing about how we normalize man-children, fathers, and the dumb dad trope and everything. I have other videos about that, but we tend to get conditioned to think that a lot of red flags are just normal in our society. And then when we wake up one day and we're like, oh my God, this happened out of the blue. Well, it probably didn't happen out of the blue, but we didn't know what the red flags were. And I really want women to be able to spot the red flags sooner, so that you can be in the relationship that you truly desire and not wake up one day and be like, oh my God, how did I get here? Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the key to having a healthy, happy relationship, is really finding somebody that you're compatible with, and finding somebody that, you know, is the right fit for you. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you have any thoughts or comments or video requests or anything, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you, and I love your video suggestions. If you would like to connect to your dark feminine energy, which is actually great for helping you to spot red flags and having a lot of confidence in yourself, check out my Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal. It's available on Amazon. Link is in the description box below, along with links to masterclasses, courses, and all my social media accounts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.